Good evening, Ed. Great show tonight, man. It was epic.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to you at home for staying with us for the next hour. All right, televised debates have existed in this country since 1960. That was the really, really famous one, right? It was sweaty Dick Nixon, sick with a fever, against polished John F. Kennedy. Legend has it that Richard Nixon heard that JFK was not going to get makeup from CBS for that debate. And so Nixon said, well, I won't have any makeup either then, even though he was running a 102-degree fever. And not only was Nixon ill that day, it turned out that when JFK turned down the CBS makeup offer, it was because he apparently had his own makeup arrangements already made. And so we got JFK with makeup and no fever. We got Richard Nixon with no makeup and a fever. And what we got on TV in the first televised presidential debate in our nation's history was Beauty and the Beast, right? Of course, JFK went on to win that election that year. Whether or not it was because of the debate, I don't know. But thus was born the entire school of punditry that says, oh, it's all about the optics and watching things with the sound off and all that existentially exhausting stuff that we still say today. But here is the relevant context for understanding what happened last night when Mitt Romney beat President Obama in last night's televised debate. So the first televised presidential debate that we had was in 1960. Here are all of the other years that we have since had televised presidential debates. Every 4 years now, we have these debates on TV. The only years, though, so these are all the years, right, that we've had, right? The only years, though, in which you had an incumbent president running against a challenger in all of the years that we have had presidential debates on TV are these years. So in terms of understanding the historical context of what happened last night when Mitt Romney beat President Obama in this first debate, this is the universe of like things to compare it to. This is how to understand it in terms of American political history. It's only these years right here. That's it. Now, by definition, you never have an incumbent president in this situation more than once. Presidents can only serve 2 terms. So there's only one opportunity when they carry into that debate, when they're running for re-election, they carry into that debate the gravitas of being the president of the United States facing off against some non-president who wants their job. That only happens once per president. And these are the only times that has happened on TV in our nation's history. That's it. And this is the situation that President Obama found himself in last night. It's only happened 6 other times in American history. So how did he do in historical context? There isn't that much historical context, right? Like, this is a very knowable thing. And honestly, that first one, 1976, where incumbent President Gerald Ford faced off against challenger Jimmy Carter, honestly, this one shouldn't even really count as part of the context like the rest of them, because this one was almost too unusual. I mean, in terms of the reaction from that first debate, you want to know who won that debate? Well, watch.
Good evening. Here's what did it. A capacitor. A tiny electronic component costing less than $1. A capacitor blew out last night in an amplifier ABC was using to feed the pool sound to all the networks, plunging President Ford and Jimmy Carter into unaccustomed silence for 27 minutes and irritating maybe 90 million people. That's why.
It's so weird how this has gone down the memory hole in terms of the way we think about televised presidential debates. But in 1976, in the first debate ever where a sitting president faced his challenger in a televised debate, I mean, yeah, it was mixed reviews in terms of who won, but mostly that was because everybody was so preoccupied with the fact that the debate collapsed on television in a technicality. Watch this.
One of the very serious things that's happened in our government in recent years, and has continued up until now, is a breakdown in the trust among our people in the...
Don't adjust your set. This is what it was like live. Hold on for just a second. This is what it was like for people watching the debate that night.
The pool broadcasters from Philadelphia have temporarily lost the audio. It is not a conspiracy against Governor Carter or President Ford, and they will fix it as soon as possible.
The pool audio from Philadelphia has been lost momentarily. We hope to have it back any minute. We don't know what's happened to it.
It took 27 minutes to get that sound back. So the first time we had an incumbent president face his challenger on TV in a debate in American history, it was totally novel to the country. It had never happened before. And the verdict, to the extent that there was any clear winner or not, well, nobody really seemed to think that there was a clear winner. Frankly, it was almost beside the point because everybody was so distracted with what went wrong. Technically, 27 minutes of silence, all blamed on this tiny little capacitor. So mostly that first one should sort of drop out of the mix because it was such an outlier from all of the rest of them, and there aren't that many of the rest of them. But in terms of the contemporaneous news coverage at the time, essentially nobody in the country thought that the incumbent president, Gerald Ford, clearly won that debate. So after the first try at this as a nation, the number of first debates won by an incumbent president facing his challenger on TV is basically zero. We'll keep this as a running tally here, right? So 0 wins at this point. 0 wins, 1 losses. The incumbent presidents are 0 for 1. How about the next one, 1980? All right, at that point, the incumbent president was Jimmy Carter. The challenger was Ronald Reagan. And everybody knows how the election came out that year. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is who won that first debate. Was it the incumbent president, Jimmy Carter, or was it the challenger, Ronald Reagan?
Leaving Cleveland this morning, the president had a message for anyone who thought Reagan had come across better in the debate.
I think the issues are more important than the performance.
The president is visibly more relaxed today than he was on the stage with Governor Reagan last night. Since there's no way to know yet for sure which man helped himself the most, it's likely that the president is simply relieved that the debate that many of his advisors never wanted in the first place is finally behind him.
Relieved that it is over. So that was the coverage the day after the Reagan-Carter debate. And because Reagan went on to win the election that year, retrospectively, that 1980 debate has been imbued with a lot of over-the-top Reagan worship stuff about his "there you go again" line and his "are you better off than you were 4 years ago" line. But that enthusiasm for Reagan's debate performance in 1980 has mostly been cooked up in subsequent years, in recent decades, as conservatives have decided that Ronald Reagan is their party's sort of secular saint. But even if at the time the reception was not so over the top, it still was pretty broadly viewed at the time that Mr. Reagan, that the challenger, won that debate, and Jimmy Carter, the incumbent, lost that debate. So 1980 adds to our tally in terms of first debates won by incumbent presidents against their challengers. After 2 tries at it, incumbent presidents are 0-2. Okay, so we got 2 tries, 0-2. Then there's 1984. At this point, the incumbent president is Ronald Reagan, and his challenger is the mighty, mighty Walter Mondale. But you can call him Fritz. You know, we look back at Reagan versus Mondale in 1984 as Reagan having dominated Mondale because he did beat him so soundly when it came to Election Day. But we're not talking about Election Day. We're talking about that first debate. And in terms of that first debate, it was completely the opposite of the way it was on Election Day. Watch.
Good evening, I'm Tom Brokaw with NBC Nightly News. A lot of people and most of the instant polls believe Walter Mondale won an important battle against President Reagan last night.
In this corner, at a feisty 170 pounds, the new heavyweight debater of the world, fighting Mondale.
At a tumultuous rally, Mondale claimed that the debate breathed new life into his campaign.
Today we have a brand new race. Today, everything is different.
While not claiming a flood of overnight conversions, Mondale's aides argue that millions of voters finally are listening to Mondale and rethinking their support for Reagan.
The seemingly unstoppable Reagan bandwagon hit a bad rut last night, and the president seemed to know it. Asked who won the debate as he left Kentucky, all he said was, "I'm smiling." At a North Carolina rally, Mr. Reagan brought up the debate himself and was downbeat.
Whether I won them or not, I know now that I have won the fruits of victory because I get to be with all of you.
The real campaigning, though, was done by the Reagan staff, trying to limit damage from the debate. Last night, officials who seldom return reporters' phone calls swarmed over the press, saying Mondale needed a knockout and got only a draw. There was even some finger-pointing in the Reagan camp. Top campaign officials said White House officials did a terrible job of preparing the president, giving him too many facts and failing to organize his answers. One top official said Mr. Reagan did 4 mock debates and every time was as bad as he was last night. As Mr. Reagan celebrated Columbus Day, aides said they expect his lead to shrink, with Democrats switching back to Mondale. But they won't change strategy, saying voters still back the president on the issues. For them, the worst thing was that a strong Reagan performance might have clinched the election, while what happened last night gave the Democrats new life.
Any of that sound familiar? So that was our nation's third try at having an incumbent president debate on TV against his challenger. The incumbent was Ronald Reagan, and he got his clock cleaned in that debate by Walter Mondale. So after our third try as a nation, the tally for incumbent presidents trying to win these first debates against their challengers was 0-3. All right, the next time that an incumbent president is facing a challenger is 1992. The incumbent president is George H.W. Bush. His major party challenger is a young man from Arkansas, but there's also this other guy with the big ears. And it's the other guy with the big ears who wins the first debate.
The day after, victory for Perot. Clinton holds his own. Trouble for the president. There is no one scorecard for determining who won and who lost last night, but a consensus does seem to be emerging. Ross Perot, the star of the night, partly because no one knew what to expect. Bill Clinton, just good enough. And President Bush, he'll have to do much better.
By morning, what had been last night's analysis had become conventional wisdom. In the headlines, on the Today Show,
Clinton did what he had to do, and Bush did not.
And in instant polls.
Those polls show the president finishing third among people who watched the first debate.
The Bush people are getting very, very tired of hearing that the president did not hit a home run last night.
So at this point as a nation, in our entire history as a country, we have had 4 national attempts of a challenger making his television debut against the sitting president of the United States. And after doing this 4 times as a nation, the record for incumbent presidents facing these challengers is 0-4. Okay, so now 1996. The incumbent president is that now not as young man from Arkansas, Bill Clinton, and his challenger that year is Bob Dole. Did Bob Dole really beat incumbent Bill Clinton in their first debate? Actually, no. This is the exception. Bill Clinton won that first debate. Here's what the headlines look like the next day. President proves unflappable facing Dole barbs. So in the 5th time that we did this as a country, new result. The incumbent president did clearly defeat his challenger in their first debate. First time that ever happened in the country. But that moves the tally for incumbent presidents trying to win their first debates against their challenger to 1-4. So next one, 2004. George W. Bush is the incumbent president. His challenger is this guy, Massachusetts Senator John Kerry. Remember at the Democratic Convention this year when John Kerry gave that bang-up speech about Mitt Romney learning everything he knew about Russia by watching Rocky IV, and his overseas trip actually being a blooper reel and all that stuff? It's this great barn burner of a very funny speech by John Kerry. And everybody said afterwards, where was that John Kerry when he was the guy running for president in 2004? Well, that John Kerry actually did show up in 2004 when he was running for president. At least he showed up for the first debate against the incumbent president that year. And in that first debate against the incumbent president, challenger John Kerry cleaned the president's clock.
I made a mistake in how I talk about the war, but the president made a mistake in invading Iraq. Which is worse?
President Bush and Senator Kerry were hard at it again today, campaigning across battleground states, continuing the spirited debate they had last night on terrorism in Iraq. But this time, they were not on a common stage, and Kerry had the kind of confidence that comes with polls and pundits agreeing that he won last night's showdown.
Did you watch that debate last night?
This was John Kerry today, bolder, declaring victory, relieving worried Democrats.
Yesterday, he showed me he's ready to lead this country.
In Pennsylvania today, the president tried to overcome doubts about his debate performance by swinging hard at his opponent. In a new line of attack he failed to use last night, but may wish he had, Mr. Bush accused Senator Kerry of more confusing contradictions on Iraq after first voting to authorize the war. Even some Bush supporters at today's rally expected more from the president last night.
I think that he could have been better in another type of format other than the debate.
And the White House advisors were spinning a Bush debate victory. They were on the defensive today about the president's demeanor last night. In television coverage, he appeared at times irritated, dismissive, frustrated by his challenger.
He's always been a president and a person who has weared his emotions on his sleeve.
If some in the White House felt this first debate would put this race out of reach, a reality check today. One senior advisor said no one will put this race away in one night.
Okay, so again, this is not about who went on to win the eventual election. This is just about who won the first debate when a sitting president is facing his challenger. And in 2004, when the incumbent president, George W. Bush, lost badly to his challenger that year, that pushed the tally for incumbent presidents trying to win those first debates against their challengers to 1 and 5. 1 win, 5 losses in the 6 times that we had done it before we did it last night. That is the sum total of our American experience of putting sitting presidents up against challengers in their first TV debates. So that was the record for incumbent presidents and their challengers. Heading into last night's showdown between incumbent President Barack Obama and the challenger Mitt Romney. The record was 1 for 5 for presidents going into a situation like President Obama went into last night. And now, of course, the record is 1 and 6, as President Obama is pretty unanimously seen as having had his clock cleaned by Mitt Romney last night. And there is more to say about the substance, about what claims were made during the debate, about what was true and what was not true, and what will live and what will be forgotten, and how the candidates seem to be adjusting their campaigns and their messages to reflect what happened last night in order to position themselves better for the debates coming up. And we will get to a lot of that this hour. That is all still to come. But in terms of the nationwide Democratic bedwetting that's going on today over the challenger having won this first debate against the incumbent President Barack Obama, come on, kids, buck up. Challenger wins first debate is not a headline that should surprise anyone, let alone cause anyone to tear their hair out in disbelief. What happened last night is the historical norm. Had Mr. Romney lost, given the fact that he is behind in the polls and given the fact that challengers basically always win the first debate against an incumbent president, it would have been historically notable and it probably would have been fatal for the Romney campaign. But the fact that it was the president who lost instead says what exactly about the rest of the race? Exactly. This modern history right here, the complete record of the precedent for this sort of thing in American presidential politics, predicts exactly nothing about the outcome of an election after what just happened at that debate last night. Again, in terms of who won the first debate when an incumbent president was facing a challenger, the record for sitting presidents is 1 and 6 now after last night. But in terms of who went on to win the election after those first debates, look, it's dead even. Wins 3. Losses 3. Half these guys won, half these guys lost when it came to election day. And this year, who knows? The great Dan Rather joins us next.